What kind of person sprays a service dog with chemicals and thinks they'll walk away unscathed? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud as I stood in the park, my heart pounding, my hands trembling around the leash of my golden retriever, Max. His soft fur was damp, reeking of some foul, acrid spray, and his trusting brown eyes darted nervously to mine, seeking reassurance I could barely muster. This wasn't just an attack on my dog. It was an assault on the lifeline that kept me tethered to the world. My name is Emily Carter, and I never imagined a sunny afternoon walk in our quiet suburban neighborhood would spiral into a battle that would shake our community to its core. The culprit? Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, whose obsession with control had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Max whimpered softly, and I knelt beside him, whispering, "It's okay, buddy," though rage boiled in my chest. I could still see her, standing a few feet away, clutching her spray bottle like a weapon, her lips curled into a smug grin as if she'd won some petty victory. She had no idea she'd just committed a federal offense. The park was our sanctuary, a place where Max and I could escape the weight of my condition. Severe anxiety and PTSD that had haunted me since a car accident 3 years ago left me scarred, both inside and out. Max wasn't just a pet. He was my service dog, trained to sense my panic attacks, to ground me when the world felt like it was collapsing. His vest, emblazoned with "Service Animal, Do Not Pet," was a shield, a signal to the world that he was working, that he was essential. But to Karen, it was apparently an invitation to wield her authority. She'd been watching us for weeks, her sharp eyes narrowing every time Max trotted across the park's grass. "No dogs on the lawn," she'd shouted once, brandishing a copy of the HOA bylaws like a holy text. I'd explained, calmly, that Max was a service animal, exempt from such rules under the Americans with Disabilities Act. She'd scoffed, muttering about special treatment, and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. That afternoon, as Max and I walked our usual loop, the air crisp with the promise of fall, Karen emerged from behind a row of neatly trimmed hedges. Her voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "You and that dog are a menace," she snapped, her manicured finger pointing at Max. I froze, my pulse spiking, but Max stayed calm, his training kicking in as he pressed his warm body against my leg. "He's a service dog, Karen," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "He's allowed here." Her eyes glinted with something dangerous, and before I could react, she raised a spray bottle, some kind of homemade concoction, likely meant for weeds or pests, and aimed it at Max. The mist hit him in a sharp burst, soaking his fur, and he yelped, a sound that tore through me like a knife. I dropped to my knees, shielding him, my voice rising. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Karen stepped back, unfazed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Keep that animal off my park, or next time it'll be worse." I was shaking, not just from anger but from the familiar claw of panic tightening around my chest. Max, sensing it, nudged my hand, his wet fur brushing against my skin as he tried to comfort me even through his own distress. I fumbled for my phone, dialing the non-emergency police line, my voice cracking as I explained what had happened. Karen watched, her arms crossed, clearly convinced she was untouchable. "It's just a dog," she said, loud enough for the gathering onlookers to hear. A small crowd had formed. Neighbors who knew me, knew Max, knew my story. Their murmurs grew louder, a mix of shock and outrage. "That's a service dog, Karen," one of them, Mrs. Delaney, called out, her voice trembling with anger. "You can't do that." Karen shrugged, her confidence unshaken. "I'm protecting our community," she said, as if spraying a dog with chemicals was some noble act. The police arrived within minutes, 2 officers stepping out of their cruiser with calm, practiced movements. I explained everything, my words tumbling over each other as I gestured to Max, still damp and uneasy. The officers listened, their faces hardening as I mentioned Max's role as a service dog. One of them, Officer Ruiz, turned to Karen, his tone clipped. "Ma'am, are you aware that interfering with a service animal is a federal offense under the ADA?" Karen's smugness faltered, just for a moment, but she doubled down. "It's my park, my rules," she said, clutching her spray bottle tighter. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Not when it comes to federal law," he replied, and I saw the first crack in her armor, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She didn't know. She genuinely didn't know the weight of what she'd done. As the officers questioned her, I took Max to the side, wiping his fur with a towel from my bag, whispering apologies he couldn't fully understand. My heart ached for him, for the trust he placed in me to keep him safe. The crowd grew, neighbors whispering, some filming with their phones, the tension in the air palpable. Karen's voice rose, defensive now, as she insisted she was within her rights. "I'm the HOA president," she declared, as if that title granted her immunity. But the officers weren't swayed. They took her statement, then mine, and as they spoke in low tones to each other, I caught fragments of their conversation, words like arrest, federal violation, and escalation. My stomach churned. This wasn't just about Max anymore. It was about justice, about standing up to someone who thought their power was absolute. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the park, and I felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. Karen had crossed a line, but I wasn't the only one she'd wronged. Whispers from the crowd hinted at her history. Petty fines, threats to neighbors, a reign of control that had gone unchecked for too long. Max rested his head on my knee, his breathing steadying, and I knew this was only the beginning. Karen thought she'd targeted a helpless dog and a vulnerable woman. She didn't realize she'd just awakened a fight she couldn't win. The park buzzed with tension as the officers led Karen to their cruiser, not in handcuffs yet, but her face was a mask of indignation. She kept glancing back at me, her eyes burning with a mix of defiance and disbelief, as if I'd somehow orchestrated this to humiliate her. I held Max close, his damp fur a reminder of her cruelty, and tried to steady my breathing. The crowd lingered, their voices a low hum of speculation, some casting sympathetic looks my way, others glaring at Karen. Mrs. Delaney, a retired teacher with a sharp tongue, approached me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Emily," she said softly. "She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years." Her words carried weight, and I began to realize this wasn't just my fight. Karen's actions had rippled far beyond Max and me, stirring something deeper in our community. As the police took statements, I learned more about Karen's reign over the HOA. She'd fine people for minor infractions, flower beds slightly too tall, cars parked an inch over a line, kids' bikes left in driveways. She'd once threatened to have a neighbor's cat seized for wandering onto her lawn. Her obsession with control was legendary, but spraying Max was a new low, even for her. I overheard Officer Ruiz explaining to his partner that tampering with a service animal could carry serious penalties, fines, even jail time. The words "federal offense" hung in the air, and I saw Karen's posture stiffen from across the park. She was starting to understand the gravity of her mistake, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. Not yet. I took Max home, my hands still shaking as I washed the chemical residue from his fur. The vet, Dr. Larson, was kind enough to make a house call, confirming Max was shaken but unharmed. "He's a tough boy," she said, ruffling his ears, but her expression darkened when I told her what happened. "That woman needs to be held accountable," she said, and I nodded, though my mind was racing. Accountability sounded simple, but I knew Karen wouldn't go quietly. She'd built her identity on being untouchable, and I was just a 30-year-old woman with a disability and a dog she'd dismissed as a nuisance. But Max wasn't a nuisance. He was my strength, my anchor, and I'd fight for him with everything I had. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of Karen's smug grin, the sharp yelp Max let out, played on a loop in my mind. I scrolled through my phone, finding messages from neighbors I barely knew, offering support, sharing their own stories of Karen's overreach. One message, from a man named Tom who lived 2 streets over, caught my eye. She tried to find me for my son's wheelchair ramp. Said it ruined the aesthetic. "You've got more allies than you think." I stared at the words, a spark igniting in my chest. This wasn't just about Max anymore. It was about a community fed up with being bullied. I replied, asking if he'd be willing to share his story. His response was immediate. "Count me in." The next morning, I woke to a surprise that shifted the entire trajectory of the fight. A video of the incident had gone viral on a local community Facebook group. Someone in the crowd had recorded everything. Karen's spray, my shouts, Max's yelp, and the police stepping in. The comments were a firestorm. Outrage, calls for justice. And to my shock, a flood of stories about Karen's HOA tyranny. People I'd never met were sharing their experiences, fines, threats, even harassment. One woman wrote about Karen reporting her to child services over a messy backyard, claiming it was neglect. Another mentioned a lawsuit Karen had filed against a family for painting their mailbox blue. The video had unleashed a tidal wave, and I realized Karen's downfall wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. But the twist came later that day, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. As I scrolled through the comments, one stood out, anonymous but chilling. Karen's not just HOA president. She's got connections, city council, maybe higher. Be careful. My heart sank. Was this why she acted so untouchable? Did she have people protecting her, pulling strings to keep her in power? The thought made my stomach churn, but it also steeled my resolve. If Karen thought her connections would save her, she was about to learn how wrong she was. I forwarded the comment to Officer Ruiz, who'd given me his card, and he replied quickly, "We're looking into it. Stay safe and keep us posted." By evening, the neighborhood was buzzing. A group of us, me, Mrs. Delaney, Tom, and a few others, met at my house. Max curled up at my feet as we planned our next move. We weren't just fighting for me or Max. We were fighting for everyone Karen had bullied. Tom suggested a petition to remove her from the HOA board, and Mrs. Delaney offered to organize a community meeting. As we spoke, I felt a shift, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before the accident. Max nudged my hand, his eyes bright, and I smiled. Karen had picked the wrong fight, and we were ready to push back. The community meeting was set for the following Saturday, and the days leading up to it felt like preparing for battle. I spent hours gathering statements from neighbors, each story a thread in the tapestry of Karen's tyranny. There was Mr. Patel, fined for his daughter's chalk drawings on the sidewalk, Lisa, a single mom, harassed for her unkempt garden, and Tom, whose wheelchair ramp was still a sore point. The anonymous comment about Karen's connections gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the momentum building around us. The video had spread beyond our neighborhood, picked up by local news outlets, and the hashtag Justice for Max was trending on X. Max, oblivious to his newfound fame, stayed by my side, his presence a steadying force as my anxiety threatened to flare. Karen, meanwhile, wasn't idle. She'd posted a lengthy defense on the HOA's website, claiming she was protecting the community from an untrained dog and accusing me of exaggerating the incident. She called the spray harmless, a gentle deterrent, and painted herself as the victim of a vicious smear campaign. Her words were polished, calculated, but they only fueled the fire. Neighbors flooded the comments with rebuttals, sharing their own encounters with her. One post, from a woman named Sarah, stood out. Karen threatened to tow my car for parking in my own driveway. She's not a protector, she's a bully. The tide was turning, but I knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. The day of the meeting arrived, and the community center was packed. Over 100 people filled the room, their faces a mix of anger, hope, and curiosity. Max sat calmly at my feet, his vest pristine, a silent symbol of why we were here. I'd prepared a speech, my hands trembling as I clutched the note cards. But when I stood to speak, my voice was steady. I told them about Max, about my PTSD, about how Karen's actions weren't just cruel but illegal. I shared the stories I'd collected, each one met with gasps or murmurs of agreement. Tom spoke next, his voice raw as he described the fight for his son's ramp. Mrs. Delaney followed, her sharp wit cutting through Karen's excuses like a knife. The room buzzed with energy, a collective realization that we were stronger together. Then Karen took the stage, and the air shifted. She was polished, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I've only ever wanted what's best for this community," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd for allies. She claimed the spray was a mistake, a moment of frustration, and promised to make amends. But her words rang hollow, and the crowd wasn't buying it. Someone shouted, "What about the fines?" Another voice called, "And the threats?" Karen's composure cracked, her smile tightening as she deflected, blaming miscommunications and overzealous enforcement. I glanced at Max, his ears perked, and felt a surge of courage. This was our moment. The twist came mid-meeting, and it was a bombshell. A man in the back, someone I didn't recognize, stood up and introduced himself as a reporter from the local paper. He'd been digging into Karen's connections, spurred by the viral video, and had uncovered something damning. Karen's brother-in-law was a city council member, and she'd used his influence to push through HOA policies that benefited her own property investments. Gasps filled the room. The anonymous comment hadn't been a rumor, it was true. The reporter held up documents, emails between Karen and her brother-in-law, outlining deals that skirted legal boundaries. The crowd erupted, shouts of "resign," echoing as Karen's face drained of color. She stammered, trying to explain, but the damage was done. Her untouchable facade was crumbling. I stepped forward, my heart pounding, but my voice clear. "This isn't just about my dog," I said, looking directly at Karen. "It's about a community that deserves better than fear and control." The room roared with applause, and for the first time, I saw fear in Karen's eyes. She'd underestimated us. Me, Max, the neighbors she'd dismissed as powerless. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to remove her from the HOA board, but I knew this was only the beginning of her reckoning. As we left the community center, Max trotting proudly beside me, I felt a flicker of hope. We were fighting back, and we were winning. The days after the meeting were a whirlwind. The vote to remove Karen from the HOA board was just the first domino, and the community was alive with a newfound sense of power. Neighbors who'd once kept their heads down were now speaking out, organizing, planning to rewrite the bylaws to prevent another Karen from taking hold. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done. Her public apology, posted online the next day, was a masterclass in deflection, crocodile tears, vague promises to do better, and a claim that she'd been misunderstood. It made my skin crawl, but the comments below it were merciless, calling her out for her lies. The viral video kept spreading, and with it, the pressure on the police to act. Officer Ruiz called me midweek with an update. The investigation into Karen's actions was escalating, and they were coordinating with federal authorities due to the ADA violation. Her connections might complicate things, he admitted, but the evidence is strong. Your statement, the video, witness accounts. He paused, then added, "She's lawyered up, though. Be prepared for pushback." I thanked him, my stomach twisting at the thought of Karen fighting back. Max sensed my unease, nudging my hand, and I scratched his ears, grounding myself in his warmth. I wasn't alone in this. My neighbors, my allies, were ready to stand with me. Karen's pushback came faster than I expected. A letter arrived from her attorney, accusing me of defamation and demanding I retract my false claims about the incident. It was a thinly veiled threat, hinting at a lawsuit if I didn't comply. I read it to Mrs. Delaney over coffee, and she laughed, a sharp, defiant sound. "She's desperate," she said, tossing the letter aside. "Let's take this to the press." We did. The reporter from the meeting, Jake, was eager to run a follow-up story, and by the next day, Karen's letter was public, backfiring spectacularly. The community rallied harder, a petition for her arrest gaining thousands of signatures online. Even strangers were sharing Max's story, calling him a hero, a symbol of resilience. But the real confrontation came at the end of the week, in a moment so charged it felt scripted. I was walking Max through the park, avoiding the spot where Karen had attacked him, when she appeared, alone, her face a mask of barely contained rage. "You're ruining my life," she hissed, stepping closer than I liked. Max growled softly, a rare sound from him, and I tightened my grip on his leash. "You did this to yourself," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. "You broke the law, Karen." She laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "You think you've won? My brother-in-law will bury this. You're nobody." Her words stung, but they also lit a fire in me. "We'll see," I said, turning away, Max at my side. I could feel her eyes boring into my back as we walked off, but I refused to look back. That night, I met with Tom, Mrs. Delaney, and a few others to strategize. Jake had uncovered more. Karen's brother-in-law had been quietly pulling strings to delay the investigation, but the public outcry was making it impossible to sweep under the rug. We decided to escalate, organizing a protest outside the HOA office, demanding transparency and justice. The community was ready, and so was I. Max, ever loyal, seemed to sense the shift, his tail wagging as we prepared signs reading "Justice for Max" and "End HOA Tyranny." The fight was far from over, but we were gaining ground, and Karen's empire was starting to crack. The protest was a turning point. Over 200 people gathered outside the HOA office, a sea of signs and voices united against Karen's reign. Max, wearing his service vest, stood proudly by my side, his presence drawing cheers from the crowd. News vans lined the street, cameras flashing as Jake and other reporters documented the scene. Mrs. Delaney led chants of "No More Karen," while Tom handed out flyers detailing her abuses. I spoke briefly, my voice amplified by a megaphone, thanking everyone for standing with us. "This isn't just about my dog," I said, echoing my words from the meeting. "It's about taking back our community." The crowd roared, and for the first time, I felt like we were unstoppable. But Karen wasn't finished. She showed up midway through the protest, flanked by her lawyer and a man I recognized from photos as her brother-in-law, Councilman Greg Harris. The crowd's energy shifted, boos rising as she stepped forward, her face a mask of forced calm. "This is a misunderstanding," she said into a microphone, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm committed to working with all of you." The lie was so blatant it sparked laughter, then shouts. Someone threw a water bottle, missing her but splashing her lawyer, and the tension spiked. Officer Ruiz and his partner stepped in, keeping the crowd at bay, but I could see the strain in their faces. This was bigger than they'd expected. Then came the moment that broke her. Jake, armed with his research, approached with a microphone, asking about her brother-in-law's involvement in her HOA schemes. Karen froze, her eyes darting to Greg, who looked like he wanted to disappear. "No comment," she snapped, but Jake pressed on, citing the emails, the deals, the conflicts of interest. The crowd surged forward, chanting, "Resign! Resign!" Karen's facade shattered. She turned and fled to her car, her lawyer scrambling after her. Greg stayed, trying to placate the crowd, but his words were drowned out. The protest had exposed her, and there was no coming back. The next day, the police called. Karen had been arrested, not just for the ADA violation, but for additional charges of fraud tied to her HOA activities. The emails Jake uncovered had triggered a deeper investigation, revealing she'd funneled HOA funds into her personal accounts, using her brother-in-law's influence to cover it up. The news hit the community like a thunderbolt. Neighbors celebrated, sharing the story online, while I sat quietly with Max, processing it all. Her empire had collapsed, her connections useless against the weight of evidence and public outrage. But I didn't feel joy, only relief, and a lingering sadness for the pain she'd caused. Karen's arrest was the talk of the neighborhood, but it didn't erase the scars she'd left. As the legal proceedings began, I learned more about the extent of her crimes. Thousands of dollars misappropriated, neighbors intimidated into silence, even forged documents to maintain her grip on the HOA. The community was healing, but it was a slow process. We elected a new board, led by Mrs. Delaney, who promised transparency and fairness. Meetings were now open, welcoming, a far cry from Karen's reign of fear. Max and I became something of local celebrities, our story a symbol of standing up to injustice. But fame wasn't what I wanted, just peace, for me and for Max. I testified at Karen's hearing, my voice steady as I recounted the day she sprayed Max, the fear in his eyes, the panic it triggered in me. The courtroom was packed, neighbors filling the seats, their presence a quiet show of support. Karen sat stone-faced, her lawyer arguing she'd acted impulsively, that the spray was non-toxic. But the judge wasn't swayed. The ADA violation carried a hefty fine, and the fraud charges added jail time, 6 months, with probation to follow. As the gavel fell, I felt no triumph, only closure. Karen's eyes met mine briefly, and for the first time, I saw no defiance, only defeat. Afterward, I took Max to the park, the same place where it all began. The grass was lush, the air warm, and Max bounded ahead, his tail wagging like nothing had ever happened. I sat on a bench, watching him play, and thought about how far we'd come. The community was different now, stronger, kinder, united. Neighbors waved as they passed, some stopping to pet Max, who soaked up the attention. I realized this fight had changed me too. I'd been so afraid of confrontation, so beaten down by my own struggles, but standing up to Karen had shown me my own strength. Months later, the neighborhood was thriving. The HOA's new rules prioritized people over perfection, and the park was alive with kids, dogs, and laughter. Max and I walked there daily, no longer looking over our shoulders for Karen's glare. She'd moved away after her release. Her house sold quietly, her name rarely mentioned. The community had moved on, but we hadn't forgotten. We'd learned what it meant to stand together, to fight for what was right, no matter how small it seemed. Max, my hero, had been the spark, his quiet resilience a reminder that even the smallest among us could change everything. I started a support group for others with service animals, sharing our stories, advocating for their rights. It grew quickly, connecting people across the city, even the state. I found purpose in it, a way to turn pain into something meaningful. Max, ever faithful, was there for every meeting, his presence a comfort to others as much as it was to me. One evening, as we sat in the park, the sunset painting the sky in hues of gold, I looked at him and smiled. "We did it, buddy," I whispered. He licked my hand, his eyes bright, and I knew we'd be okay. The fight had been worth it, not just for us, but for everyone who'd found their voice because of it.